Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on SAUGA 960 AM. I've got an interesting update for you tonight with Michael Zahra, who is the president and CEO of Drone Delivery Canada. I interviewed him back a couple of months ago when COVID-19 was just starting, and we talked about some of the new technologies that could be really helpful in COVID-19. And they've just made a major announcement, and so I thought we'd come back and do a check-in. So, Michael, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Very well, thank you. So tell us what's been happening with your business in the last 2 months.
So we've seen an explosion of inquiries from First Nations communities, as well as healthcare, broadly defined as hospitals and medical labs and pharmaceutical manufacturers, as well as from the government related to drone logistics for the pandemic specifically. And the reason is there's a new use case that's come about as a result of the pandemic, and that's really trying to limit person-to-person contact. So drone delivery is ideal for that situation.
So the elimination of person-to-person contact, we see it at Tim Hortons where they're passing the debit and credit card machine out to you by way of a hockey stick.
Right.
But a drone is a far more distant kind of connection. What are some of the uses?
Sure. So they're very broad. It could be a hospital that has multiple locations and they want to eliminate cross-contamination. So they could be using a drone for moving supplies between a hospital and a hospital location, or a hospital to a long-term care center or to a medical lab. And what's really come to light is the fact that First Nations communities are particularly susceptible during a pandemic because they have very poor healthcare infrastructure, and they often have greater underlying healthcare issues like diabetes or high blood pressure or tuberculosis and these sort of things that puts them extra at risk. So a lot of these communities are starting to isolate themselves so the virus doesn't come into the community, which would be devastating. So they're doing that, but they also need to keep the supply chain open. So drones are a perfect application for that. So we're talking to the government, we're talking to First Nations communities about using drones for that application.
Now, you made a recent announcement that you've got a major grant or something?
So we have a project with a First Nations community. It's called Beausoleil First Nation, and they are in Ontario. The project came about from a humanitarian organization called Global Medic, and they receive funding from a number of entities, the largest one being OEC Group, which is a large logistics company. And they essentially hired us to implement a drone logistics solution for the benefit of the First Nations community of Beausoleil. The community has a portion of the population on a mainland and a portion on an island, and they want to limit ferry use and limit person-to-person contact. So the engagement was specifically around coronavirus to use drones to limit person-to-person contact.
Excellent. And I think you described to me that you have some really big drones and some not so big drones. Is this going to be one of the big ones?
This is going to be the smaller one for their application because it's really short distance, it's about 4 kilometers. So we're going to be using the Sparrow, which has a range of about 30 kilometers and carries a payload of up to 10 pounds. But you're right, we do have a larger drone. Our largest in the fleet of 3 that we, different models that we have, is the Condor, which has a range of 200 kilometers and 180 kilograms or 400 pounds of payload. So there are some projects that we're looking at that are other First Nations communities that are even more geographically isolated. So potentially some Condor applications in the future as well.
Fantastic. And when we chatted last, we were talking about how South Korea, for an example, had used drones for a lot of different purposes, and China as well within, and Saudi Arabia too, I think as well, in regards to monitoring crowds that were getting together, dispersing the crowds, actually even taking temperatures. Have there been any investigations of those uses of the drones?
Not yet in Canada. I mean, the governments around the world have been embracing drones. You're absolutely right. We don't care what the cargo is. So we could carry cameras, infrared cameras. We could carry public announcement systems. We're capable of doing that. But Canada, in this case, this is the very first COVID-19 project announced in Canada, and it's cargo related.
Okay. What about these protests and demonstrations the last couple of weeks? They would have been a perfect opportunity for police or government or public health to be using drones to watch where the protesters are going. Was there any contemplation of that?
We haven't had anybody reach out specifically on that. I think it happened very quickly, so there wasn't any immediate opportunity, and nobody reached out to us from the government or what have you. But yeah, that would have been a perfect example. I mean, we're doing cargo drones, but we don't care what the cargo is. So again, it could be cameras, it could be video cameras, it could be infrared cameras, it could be public announcement systems. It could really be anything that we can carry. So that would be an application.
And when you're directing that drone, you're piloting it from a remote location, correct?
We're not actually piloting it. It runs unmanned automatically. We monitor our fleet of drones anywhere in the world from our operations control center here in Vaughan, just outside the city of Toronto. And we monitor and we can deconflict the situation if there's anything in the local airspace. So for instance, if there was another aircraft having an emergency and everybody needed to get out of the way, then we could take control. We could hover, go home, change altitude, do whatever we needed to deconflict the situation. But otherwise, the system runs unmanned automatically.
We're chatting with Michael Zahra, the President and CEO of Drone Delivery Canada tonight. We're going to take a break for some messages and come right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, SAUGA 960. We're chatting again with Michael Zahra, who is the President and CEO of Drone Delivery Canada, a drone delivery company that has just recently announced a fairly major opportunity to use drones to deliver goods to Indigenous communities and effectively insulate them far better during coronavirus, COVID-19, from human-to-human interaction. So, Michael, as you think about some of the other uses of drones, what are you looking at and what are you pitching governments and or other industries for the uses?
Right. So before coronavirus, broadly, there were really two use cases. The first one was remote communities where access was difficult, last mile was difficult or very expensive, Indigenous and not Indigenous. And then the other broad use case was where time is of the essence. So maybe you can get there, but I can get there faster with a drone. And that makes a difference in medical or emergency or humanitarian projects. And then also, commercial industrial projects where time is money. As a result of the pandemic, there are two more use cases that have come to light. One is limiting person-to-person contact, which we've talked about, healthcare, First Nations. And then the fourth one is companies are now examining their business continuity plans and their disaster recovery plans, and they're realizing they don't have a backup to their supply chain. So this could be a perfect solution to have a backup to their existing supply chain. So companies are starting to re-examine that and seeing drone delivery as an integral part of their existing supply chain. So really, the pandemic has really raised the profile of drone logistics overall.
Explain the supply chain issue. So this is not someone that's trucking it across North America. This is what, someone within in an urban environment?
So it could be in a suburban or rural environment where you do truck delivery, but now you have difficulty getting drivers, or you want to limit person-to-person contact if you're delivering to sensitive areas, or maybe drivers are off sick and these sort of things. So it's a strain on their existing supply chain, and they don't really have a backup. But drones, especially the Condor, could be a perfect replacement for some of those applications.
And what's the cost differential between delivering by a drone versus delivering by a truck?
It's hard to say. It really depends on the application, but the ongoing operating cost of a drone is very, very low. The two smaller drones, the Sparrow and the Robin, are electric. So really the operating cost is charging the battery. The larger one, the Condor, is gasoline powered, but it's very reliable, very low maintenance. It's automotive fuel, very simple, very inexpensive. So it's very, very cost effective. The payback depends on the application, but it's very, very cost effective versus some traditional means.
Just fascinating. I really, I'm looking forward to following your progress over time, because I think it's an incredibly interesting technology. And lots of us have seen people using drones for pleasure and stuff, but it's got to have an incredible amount of practical application. So I'm looking forward to hearing it. But you know what would be great is if at some point in time you could actually give us a tour of some of these drones and show them to us and describe them to us and talk about some of the features.
I'd be happy to do that. I can show you the smallest one, the Sparrow, and I'll also show you the largest one, which is the Condor, which I think people will find very exciting.
That would be good. And I see that you've got a big airplane in behind you. Is that the Million Mile Flyer Award from Air Canada?
We have a partnership with Air Canada. They are acting as a commercial reseller of our solution in Canada and globally. So that's one of their aircraft.
So have you been in the aircraft business for a long time?
I've been with this company since 2018. This company has been in the industry for about 6 years, but I've been with the company since 2018.
And is your background aeronautics or shipping or what?
No, well, a little bit of everything. I have an engineering degree, so my bachelor's is in electrical engineering. I then did an MBA in international business, and I have something called a PLOG, which is in logistics. So I've got a good fit for this business because of the engineering and the business and the logistics component. So it's a very good fit for what I'm doing.
I can well imagine. And you're a Canadian company, privately owned, publicly owned?
We're a Canadian company. We are publicly traded on the TSXV, ticker symbol FLT, and a very good Canadian success story. All the intellectual property is ours, Canadian, patented as well.
And how's the stock done with COVID-19 and the potential for drone delivery?
The stock has done rather well in the last little while because, again, COVID-19 has really raised the profile of the industry overall, and then obviously of the company as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for giving us an update. Sounds like this Indigenous opportunity you've got to deliver goods to remote communities is excellent and will stop infections. And so therefore that should have some real benefits for you long term. I look forward to you giving us a tour.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a break. And when we come back, Michael's going to give us a tour of the Condor and one of the Sparrows or the Robins.
Yeah, the Sparrow and the Condor. I'll show you the smallest one and the biggest one.
Excellent. So stay with us. And next is a tour of 2 drones from Michael. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, that's great. Michael, maybe you can show us these drones now.
Sure, absolutely. I'd be happy to. So this here is the Sparrow. It's our smallest drone. It's electric. It has a range of about 30 kilometers with a payload capacity of about 4.5 kilograms, which is about 10 pounds. And you can see it a bit closer where the package goes. And it can be used for medical supplies, e-commerce supplies, postal mail, really anything. And this is the one that we announced recently we're going to be using for a First Nations community COVID-19 project.
Awesome. Pretty impressive. Thank you.
And then our largest one, I'm showing you the smallest one and the largest one. The largest one is the Condor, and it's gasoline powered, much larger, looks like a small helicopter. And it has a range of about 200 kilometers and a payload capacity of about 180 kilograms, so about 400 pounds. So it could be used for the same sort of things as the Sparrow, but in bulk, or carrying larger supplies like PPE or ventilators, or even going out to sea for an oil rig or at a mining project. So medical, industrial, commercial type applications as well.
Awesome. And how many gallons or liters does it to hold of gas?
I think it's 47 liters, but it gives us a range of 200 kilometers with 400 pounds. So it's a real game changer in the industry globally. So we're very excited about having the Condor.
How fast does it fly?
It's about 120 kilometers an hour, so we can get there in a hurry if it's urgent.
And how high?
Typically, the Sparrow, we would be flying at around 400 feet maximum. The Condor, 1,000 feet or so, depending on the application.
Now, would I typically lease this from you or buy it from you or just pay a payment per shipment?
So our projects are done as a managed service, meaning we supply the infrastructure. So we would supply the drones and the drone spots that they fly between and any kind of battery management system that the customer might need for the electric drones, and we supply it as a managed service. So typically there's a upfront payment for the implementation, and then there's an ongoing monthly fee for the managed service and monitoring of the service and any kind of customer service, technical support, and these sort of things.
And tell me, how does it fly? Is there like a helicopter kind of blade on the top of it, or what?
So for the Sparrow and the Robin, which is one up from the Sparrow, both electric, they have 8 motors and 8 rotors. And the Condor, it's like a helicopter. It literally has a rotor on top and a tail rotor, and then functions exactly the same as a traditional helicopter, a bit smaller, and it's gasoline powered, just regular automotive fuel, a little different than the other Sparrow and Robin, which are electric.
And you say that the controls are all done remotely. So what happens if you lose connection with one of the Condor or the Sparrow during its flight?
So we don't need to be in constant communication with the drones for them to fly. They're pre-programmed with their route, GPS coordinates, and they fly from a depot to depot. We do have redundant communication systems and fail-safe systems, so that's typically not a problem. But if something were to happen, they can continue on their route, no problem.
And what happens if there's another drone or a flock of birds or a helicopter in their way?
So we have a system called Flight, which is a software system. And we also have an operations control center that allows us to monitor weather, allows us to monitor the airspace and other air traffic. And we monitor the system with human operators, and we can take control as necessary to deconflict the situation. So if there was another aircraft in the vicinity, we would be able to detect that. Or if another aircraft was in the area and it was having emergency and everybody needed to clear out of the way, we could manually take control from our operations control center outside of Toronto to any drone globally and do whatever we need to do to deconflict the situation.
Awesome. Well, I think that was very impressive, and I really enjoyed being able to see your 2 drones. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
So that was Michael Zahra, the CEO of Drone Delivery Canada. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.